The myth of the transformation into wolves is a universal theme across European pagan mythology. Scholars have speculated that these stories, Romulus and Remus suckled by wolves, Sigmund and Sinfjotli transforming into wolves in the Volsunga saga, and even the medieval folklore of werewolves, could be a distant, mythic memory of when the savage warrior bands of the Indo-Europeans first thundered into Europe, dressed in wolfskins, raiding villages by night. However, as Europe was Christianized during the Middle Ages, and the pagan myths were suppressed, this pan-European trope was demonized. It became the figure of the werewolf, associated with witchcraft and the devil. Yet these pagan wolf stories contain within them the seeds of Europe's most ancient theology, one which is surprisingly relevant to the issues plaguing the modern West. Berserkers are the only potentially historical example of the werewolf archetype, wild, savage warriors devoted to the god Odin. They appear throughout the Norse sagas, and the saga of Hervor and Heydrich even follows a berserker bloodline. We also have a crucial description of berserkers and their role in the prose Edda. The role that berserkers played in Norse and Germanic society is unclear, but they appear often enough in the sources for us to be fairly certain that they did exist, unlike the reconstructed concept of the Koryos. The prose Edda is a prose narration and compilation of Norse myth and legend written in the 1200s in Iceland by the author Snorri Sturluson. He euhemerizes the gods, which means that he portrays them as humans who were later deified, and he even gives them a Trojan origin. I think I mentioned before that Trojan origins was a very common myth during the Middle Ages, used by both Frankish and British historians. But still, Snorri's work is tremendously helpful in filling in the gaps in what we can glean from the Poetic Edda, and this is what he says about berserkers. Odin could make his enemies in battle blind or deaf or terror-struck, and their weapons so blunt that they could no more cut than a willow twig. On the other hand, his men rushed forward without armor. They were as mad as dogs or wolves, bit their shields, and were strong as bears or wild bulls, and killed people at a blow, and neither fire nor iron told upon them. These were called berserkers. Now there's two etymological explanations for the term berserker. One is bear, as in without shirt, implying that they fought without shirts, and the other is bear, as in the animal shirt, implying that they wore bearskins. It seems that the second explanation is most likely. Elsewhere we have mentions of Ulfheðinar, literally meaning wolfskins, and they appear to be identical to berserkers, so it makes sense that berserkers would mean bearskins. Fighting shirtless and wearing only animal skins was a common custom among the pagans. According to Roman sources, the Celts fought shirtless, and some Germanic warriors fought shirtless or wearing only animal skins, and the Greeks and Romans often depicted their heroes as naked, except for an animal skin. This is how Hercules is depicted. The idea of the battle frenzy is also well established in European heroic literature. Achilles and Aeneas both enter battle frenzies, and the Irish hero Cuchulainn enters into a berserker rage in which he becomes monstrous and unstoppable. So all of the elements of the berserker appear elsewhere in the European pagan traditions, but no exact equivalent appears, and we therefore don't know exactly what social role they played. Were they mercenaries, shock troops, outlaws, a religious cult devoted to Odin, like a Norse version of the Knights Templar? Did they exist during the Viking Age, or were they by then already a mythic memory or a literary trope, like the Amazons in Greek literature? Whatever the case may be, in the sagas they appear as liminal figures, roaming, lawless warriors who, like animals, exist beyond the bounds of custom, law, and morality. So why was such a thing allowed in Norse society, and why would such savage warriors be sacred to Odin, the highest god? This stems from a much deeper pagan theological concept, that even chaos, the forces of destruction, are sacred. The basic premise of pagan theology is the struggle between order and chaos, form and dissolution. Life represents the ultimate force of order because it actively resists entropy. Biological organisms actively heal themselves. They grow, and though the individual organism dies, we reproduce our form by passing on the hidden order in our genes each generation. Pagan metaphysics are very much rooted in nature, not in a woo-woo way, but in a very concrete and visceral way. Life is associated with light and the sun because the sun nourishes life, and plants strive upwards towards the sun, away from the earth, which is the house of death where living things are reabsorbed after they die. Order and chaos, life and death, form and dissolution are locked in an endless cycle of struggle. As the sun disappears into darkness each day, life goes to sleep, the flowers close, but at dawn, life is pulled again out of the clutches of darkness. This is why sleep and death are closely associated. And every generation, life resurrects out of death. Old forms dissolve, new forms are born, the chain of being continues. Alright, so this seems simple enough. Life and order equals good, chaos and death equals bad. It could almost sound Christian, but there's a catch. Like we talked about earlier, the bad parts of life are inseparable from the good. Since the fundamental instinct of life is growth, expansion, colonization, in human terms, striving, excellence, competition, and desiring, life also must participate in chaos. In order to grow, in order to be strong and vital, we must eat. Today we get our food already packed from the store, so it conceals the horror of what's happening. But in order to live, you have to go grab an animal out of the wilderness, slit its throat, cut it into pieces, roast it on a fire, and grind its sinews down to a pulp with your teeth. When you eat, you're literally taking another creature, another form of life, and dissolving, digesting its structure, turning its ordered form into raw material that you can absorb into your ordered form. And even if you only eat plants, you're doing the same thing, just to a less complex life form. Life is naturally a colonist. When put into a landscape or ecosystem, it will take over, shaping that environment to itself, and if it has a great enough advantage, often completely destroy the ecosystem and every other life form in it. We must participate in chaos in order to live. Reproduction itself is a solution to death, and though the pagans wouldn't have known this, evolutionarily speaking, it is life's struggle with death and entropy which has produced ever more complex and powerful forms. Life began on Earth with very basic, primitive forms, but now, millions of years later, man is so complex that he is able to, like the gods, bend the forces of nature to his very will. So chaos, death, violence are inseparably linked to life, and therefore in the pagan view, they are sacred. Moreover, chaos, raw, unordered matter, is the precondition of all order, all form and structure. To create a beautiful sculpture, you must first have the raw clay, and for you to be created, you needed the raw nutrients which your mother provided for you in the womb by dissolving other life forms. Instead of recoiling at this harsh reality and rejecting it, as liberalism tends to do and as Christianity does, positing a vision of life without death or suffering, the pagans made chaos itself sacred. We must kill animals to live, therefore it will be ritualized in animal sacrifices, so that we are reminded that even death and chaos are sacred and are preconditions of life. And it's the same with the instincts. Sexuality, hunger, aggression are ancient, violent beasts, which when given untamed rein, cause havoc and destruction. Yet these powerful instincts motivate us to strive towards beauty and goodness. If we neutered our sexuality, we would not be motivated to strive and compete for the most beautiful and excellent mates, and therefore to reproduce. Without the instinct of aggression and violence, we would not be able to defend our kin, and we would not be motivated to strive for excellence. Without these things, we would cease to exist. The pagan view, therefore, is that these raw forces of nature must not be destroyed or neutered, but rather integrated, disciplined, and directed, put into service of the higher. Berserkers, therefore, these savage, animalistic warriors, serve the highest god, Odin, and are allowed to exist at the edges of society as a kind of permanent Corios class, at least in the sagas. This is always how pagan literature is, testing its own morals, its own ideals, and exploring what happens when they are absent, degraded, or pushed to the breaking point. In an age where we drown ourselves in simple pleasures and cheap distractions, When our society tells us to ignore the most basic realities of life, like gender or ethnicity, and shelters us from the harsh necessities of human survival, the slaughter of animals, war, when the most basic instincts of life, sexuality, aggression, competition, those things which cause us to reproduce, to thrive, to pursue excellence and flourishing, are neutered rather than nurtured, we would do well to remember the wisdom of our ancestors. Civilizations are built when men choose to confront, embrace, and master the harshness and savagery of the world. And when we seek to escape these things, to build utopias free of suffering, full of pleasures without cost, it is then that civilizations collapse. This video is a short excerpt from my heroic literature course, where I am now covering the Norse legendary cycle. We already covered the Volsung cycle, are now on the Tyrfing cycle, which is filled with berserkers, and next up is Beowulf. Every episode in this section so far has been about an hour long, so there's a ton of content there if you are interested in Norse and Germanic heroic literature.